big American trucks on the moon, digging stuff up, hauling it to rockets, and sending it back to Earth. All in the dream of making the average Earth person affluent in a way few can imagine today. Thanks to an endless supply of critical minerals and also the key ingredient for limitless energy from fusion. This week, we're talking about something that doesn't exist yet, but that our guest insists will exist someday, the lunar economy. Justin Cyrus is the founder and CEO of Lunar Outpost, a company that makes space trucks. It's one of 3 companies that have been selected by NASA to build a lunar terrain vehicle, or LTV, for its Artemis missions. Ultimately, NASA expects that it will select one company for the demonstration.
Cyrus says he wants his company to be the mobility provider for the lunar economy. In other words, he wants to build big American trucks for the moon. Let's roll the tape.
Can you name the truck with 4-wheel drive? Smells like a steak and seats 35. Can you narrow? Can you narrow?
Oops, wrong clip.
The value that the moon can bring as the naturally largest orbiting satellite of Earth to the Earth economy right now is pretty massive, even if you start discounting the resources and the future of the resources in space. So right now, America is going back to the moon.
The next time someone asks why the USA went to the moon just long enough to plant a flag and leave some footprints, you tell them America is going back. This time for good.
The moon is Earth's naturally largest orbiting satellite. If you think of it just as a giant satellite in the sky, think about the Earth observation equipment you can put on there. Think about the weaponry that hopefully never gets put on the lunar surface, but it is the ultimate high ground in near-Earth space. There is no better strategic or military positioning.
From the Wall Street Journal, I'm Tim Higgins.
And I'm Christopher Mims. This is Bold Names, where you'll hear from the leaders of the bold name companies featured in the pages of the Wall Street Journal. Today we ask, why are the US and our biggest rivals all in a race to build permanent bases on the moon, and how will we do it?
Welcome, Justin. Looking forward to talking about your moon truck and your moon robots and your first mission to the moon earlier this year. But let's first zoom out, or maybe zoom in to Earth, to paraphrase JFK in 1962. Why the moon? Again. I say that because the U.S., of course, was the first to set foot on the moon in 1969 with the Apollo mission, and hasn't set foot again since 1972. I think a lot of people, it's sort of been there, done that, really just a big gray rock, a harsh place with not a lot to offer. So what is there to gain going back?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tim. Really excited to be here. There's a lot. There's a lot going on the lunar surface. There's a lot going on in space that's going to contribute to what we are doing here on Earth and how we operate as humanity. So, of course, the science, the exploration, that kind of innate quality of being a human being, we want to push the boundaries to go where we've never been before. And that's all part of it again. You know, that hasn't gone away. But in terms of what we can do economically, that is a very important question that I don't think the broader public is aware of quite yet. When you start looking at the lunar surface, you have many of those resources readily available and accessible that have been deposited by asteroids over the course of billions of years. You have your platinum group metals, you have many other resources that have been implanted on different locations in the moon because of that asteroid bombardment. In addition, you have solar wind implanted volatiles. So you have these really rare isotopes that we don't get here on Earth because we have a magnetosphere and we are protected by our atmosphere. So you have these, think solar winds like volatiles, hydrogen, your heliums.
And let me stop you there.
Yeah.
I'm obviously a huge fan of going to the moon for helium-3. I mean, because we can use that for clean fusion.
And Mims is always talking about helium-3 here behind the scenes of Bold Names. So we'll get to that.
Yeah, we can use it for cooling quantum computers. I'm serious. The future is helium-3 from the moon. But I got to ask you, setting these resources aside, because it is going to take a long time to build up to the point where we can economically extract those from the moon, as opposed to the deep ocean where we can get rare earth elements, or existing gas wells where we can extract helium-3. In the near term, it is government contracts, right? And NASA has this Artemis program to go back to the moon. Could you talk about that? What are the near-term government efforts that are going to bridge the construction of building this lunar economy, getting us from where we are zero to the point where it's like, this is self-sustaining economically?
Yeah, and fair enough, Mims. It is going to take a little bit of time to set up the infrastructure to access these resources at scale. One thing I like to point out is it's actually easier to go to the moon than it is to mine the deep ocean. If you start thinking about the bureaucratic and environmental challenges that basically drag mining the deep ocean is going to present, and the damage that can be done with that type of resource extraction, it's a lot easier to go to a lifeless body such as the moon or asteroids and actually extract resources from there. But to your point, we don't have the infrastructure right now to actually go and extract the resources from the lunar surface. So it is a lot of government contracts. And it is complementary customers that are either doing technological demonstrations, science and exploration missions, or using it as branding and marketing campaigns. So to talk a little bit about our first missions, and then I'll get into what we're doing with the Artemis campaign and what we're doing with NASA more broadly. Our first mission just went to the moon a couple months ago. So we actually landed at the lunar South Pole. Now, it wasn't perfect landing from our landing provider. It was an off-nominal landing.
That was the Intuitive Machines landing?
The Intuitive Machines landing, exactly.
And for those who don't know, it landed, it had all these great payloads on board, including yours, and it tipped over. And this was, I think, the second time it happened. They have a real tip-over problem, and there's nobody there to just, like, push it back.
Exactly. Like, if something happens, you are on your own. You have to figure out how to operate in that extreme environment all by yourself. I am confident they'll nail the next one, learn from the first two missions. But with that being said, we were trapped under the lander, so we couldn't deploy our rover. But as a part of that mission, to talk on the commercialization, because this was a fully commercial rover, we had payloads from MIT. We had a resource camera that was actually going to help us map the lunar South Pole. We had a tiny little astrant, so like a 20-gram robot that was going to R2-D2 its way around our rover and basically give us feedback and analytics on how our rover was performing. We had brand partners back here on Earth.
Were there any brand stickers on your rover?
No brand stickers on our rover, but we did have a lot of payloads on board. So one of my favorites, Mims, is we have our own Lego set. So we are the first space company in history to have a Lego set. The inner 5-year-old in me is like extraordinarily ecstatic about this. But that Lego set, it's a Lego Technic set, has a miniature of our rover that actually flew to the lunar surface. So of course, that is commercialization at a smaller scale. But in terms of the awareness and getting people familiar with what's going on as part of the Artemis programs, that is massively invaluable.
Yes, but to get to the bigger picture, though, ultimately, we're building a base on the moon. Like, we're going back to the moon, human habitation, permanent human habitation, not just, what do they call it? Boots and flags or whatever. You show up and you go.
Flags and footprints, exactly.
Flags and footprints. So we are going to have a base on the moon. This is NASA's stated goal. And if we don't do it, then the upside down version of the Artemis coalition, which is like Russia, China, Venezuela, and a bunch of other fun-loving countries, they're going to do it too, because they've said they're on their way to doing it as well.
And that's it, Mims. And the reason that's important is think about it this way. If nothing else, even if you don't believe anything with the resources on the moon, even if you don't think that's going to happen for 2 or 3 decades, the moon is Earth's naturally largest orbiting satellite. If you think of it just as a giant satellite in the sky, think about the Earth observation equipment you can put on there. Think about the weaponry that hopefully never gets put on the lunar surface, but it is the ultimate high ground in near Earth space. There is no better strategic or military positioning if you look at it in the worst case scenario. So that's what we don't want to happen. Now, if you look at it from the other side, the value that the moon can bring as the naturally largest orbiting satellite of Earth to the Earth economy right now is pretty massive, even if you start discounting the resources and the future of the resources in space. So right now, America is going back to the moon. There is nation state competition, and it is critical for our national defense for us to have a continuous presence in cislunar space. And to keep pushing, it's important for us for that long-term goal of resources to get our footprint there now.
We reached out to Intuitive Machines and NASA. They did not respond to a request for comment.
Coming up after the break, the mantra, failure is not an option, doesn't apply to the age of private space missions. That's because every mission is so much cheaper than a typical NASA one that companies can afford to fail. Though that doesn't mean it's not tough to accept.
You know, if you guys see the live stream, it's just kind of like a shock moment when I think the Intuitive Machines folks saw the lander go on its side. You know, for us, it was a bit of a heart drop because you spend a couple years on this first mission, and it was a bit heartbreaking, but at the same time, it was exciting because we made a rover that got all the way to the moon.
Stay with us. Okay, so we know the universal picture here. Let's talk about where your company fits into this economy. Who are you guys, and what sort of opportunities are you seeing right now?
Yeah, our company, Lunar Outpost, we are the leader in mobility and robotics for extreme environments. So we focus in space. We have 7 missions going to space, 5 of them lunar surface, 2 of them in cislunar space, a mix of customers from NASA, the Department of Defense, European Space Agency, Australian Space Agency, Luxembourg Space Agency, and many others. Now, where we're at the moment, we're about 150 people. Our headquarters is in Golden, Colorado, right outside Denver.
Close to Coors, I hope.
Close to Coors, yep.
You're fueled by Coors beer, I hope. You don't need rocket fuel.
We do not work with them yet, so I won't say the tagline of fueled by Coors beer, but we'd love to work with them. I'm pretty sure NASA would say no drinking and driving on the moon, though. So it's.
But how do you get to the moon? I mean, you're not working on rockets. I mean, who's getting up there?
So I think a big shift in the space industry is you don't have to work on rockets anymore to be relevant. It's very similar to the internet in the 90s. When you had the network and the infrastructure in place, thousands of companies sprung up around that baseline transportation or baseline communication infrastructure. The
fiber optic companies, the Ciscos of the world.
Exactly, Mims. Exactly.
And now we have those, right? And that's SpaceX and Blue Origin and the rest?
100%. And there's a dozen launch companies that are pretty good, right? SpaceX obviously is dominant. Blue Origin's coming up. They're figuring things out. You have Firefly that's launching, and then you have Rocket Lab. So you have a lot of good companies out there that are working on that infrastructure layer. So now us as a company, we have to ask what's next. How do we make this a viable, long-term growing, sustainable economy? And that's where our company comes into play. For anything you want to do in space, you have to have robotic systems. For anything you want to do in space, you have to have advanced spacecraft. Realistically, putting humans up in space is a very expensive and arduous process right now. We're hoping to make that easier over time. But that means all of the power, all of the communications, the launch and landing pads, the habitats, all of that is going to be built and maintained by robotic systems. And that's what we do at Lunar Outpost. So that's what we're doing now. And when you look at our first 7 missions that are going, including the one a couple months ago, these are scouting missions, these are exploration missions, and then they start transforming into infrastructure missions. So we are setting up, on our first mission, we actually flew Nokia, the 4G LTE, their 3GPP technology.
Yeah, they were going to make the first cell phone call on the moon. But once again, this rover tipped over, and they couldn't do it.
The lander tipped over.
That's right, not the rover.
Yeah,
Your rover was fine. It was trapped inside, though.
Maybe paint us a picture a little bit. So the lander gets there, and it kind of falls over. So what?
Yeah, so our rover is like in a garage. So it's a thermal garage, keeps us nice and toasty along the way, and it is kind of ready to be deployed. So we did full checkouts in cislunar space. Intuitive Machines did a great job of getting our packets back, if you will. We got to test our advanced compute, our radiation hardening, a lot of our important subsystems. And so we knew everything's ready to go. And so
But
we're
it's
like
stuck in that garage, essentially, right?
Yeah. So when we were cycling around lunar orbit, we're getting excited. Everyone's getting ready to go. We see the thermal cycles as we get closer and closer to the moon. And then, if you guys see the live stream, it's just kind of like a shock moment when I think the Intuitive Machines folks saw the lander go on its side. For us, it was a bit of a heart drop because you spend a couple years on this first mission, and it was a bit heartbreaking. But at the same time, it was exciting because we made a rover that got all the way to the moon, survived an off-nominal landing, and got to test all these critical components. So we got stuck in our garage. The lander, because it's landed on its side, is actually on top of our garage. So we were like a little kickstand, more or less, for the lander that allowed them to communicate back to Earth still. So we served our purpose. We helped them get packets back to Earth. But unfortunately, because the lander was on top of us, our garage couldn't deploy, and we couldn't actually get out of the garage.
Now, I got to ask about this failure in the context of NASA's new strategy, because your background, for those who don't know, you were at Lockheed Martin, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have family members working on this company with you. Like, your dad was a vice president at Lockheed Martin. You've talked about growing up close to a space center when you were a kid. And NASA has shifted in a way that makes your company possible, right? They're contracting private companies. Of course, the challenge then is that unlike when it's all under one big roof, everybody gets to move fast, but maybe those learnings don't get carried over mission to mission. It does feel like on this particular, out of the last, I think, 4 landings from the U.S. on the moon, 3 of them failed. One was a huge success. It does feel like, well, what do you expect? Like, this is a bunch of startups. No shade on you again, but I mean, would this have been better if NASA had been responsible for this and a bunch of engineers who knew what they were doing, who'd been on 5 previous missions, could land this thing?
I'll push back a little bit and say you can land 10 CLPS landers for the price of one NASA lander. So even if you get one of them down, which if you saw Firefly's landing a month or 2 ago, Austin, Texas company, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. We got great images, we got great video down. That one landing would have cost at least 10 times the amount if NASA had run this by themselves instead of partnering commercial industry. So in terms of the investment, like the capital deployed versus scientific return, the CLPS program has already given a return on investment higher than historically run NASA mission. Now, if you look at the future and if you look at the groundwork that's being laid now by startups and commercial companies like ours, it's going to have a few failures, and that's inevitable. But at the same time, if you are able to continue making progress, if you learn from your mistakes, if you iterate on it and keep the capital flowing, right? If you have real revenue as a space company moving forward and keep that growth profile, we have seen a lot of companies be extremely successful. So of course, you have the new age of companies. I think Voyager just went public via SPAC a couple weeks ago that are doing well on the open markets. But then harkening back to the most successful yet, which is still in the private markets, SpaceX, those types of failures are okay as long as you learn from them. Now, you can't repeat the same mistake 2, 3, 4 times and expect NASA to keep funding you or the DoD to keep funding you. There's a lot of competition out there. There's a very high bar and expectations because of all the amazing things we've accomplished in space so far. So there is pressure on these commercial companies to succeed, not only from a market standpoint if you're trading publicly, from an investor standpoint if you're trading privately, but also from our largest customer.
One of the big contracts you're working on is for NASA. It's a space truck, and I'd love to hear more about that, because when I think of a lunar rover, I think of one from the 1970s, like a low-profile golf cart with really big wheels. Yep. What does yours look like, and what's it going to be doing on the moon?
And how much was the Cybertruck an inspiration?
I like the Cybertruck. I know it's very polarizing. Some people hate it, some people like it. The profile reminds me of the F-117A from Lockheed back in the day when like the computers just couldn't make the well-modeled stealth technology, so they did these big flat angles. So that probably biased me a little bit. But the LTV, the Lunar Terrain Vehicle, this is a pretty critical program from NASA. Our Eagle lunar terrain vehicle is going to serve as the backbone.
The
for
Eagle.
The Eagle. Yeah, we had
It's better
to
than
harken
like
back.
it's better than the pony or the Mustang, maybe the Eagle. Huh?
It's pretty American. And I got a golden eagle here on my vest. It's I don't know that call out from Apollo, the eagle has landed. Still is the golden age of American spaceflight so far.
That's the inspiration.
So
I guess
for our
that's the
gearheads,
inspiration.
just lay it on us. Like, what are the specs on this thing? 0 to 60, how much can it tow?
How many cup holders? How many cup holders?
No cup holders, but this is a heavy duty truck. This can tow thousands of kilograms. This can carry two fully pressurized suited astronauts, over 800 kilograms of payload in the bed. It can tow thousands of kilograms. Now, it has a fully autonomous and robotic arm on the back. So when astronauts aren't there, it can be used to build and maintain the infrastructure of space. So as I was talking about a little bit earlier, the power, communications, the habitats, all of that is going to be set up robotically and autonomously with this heavy duty space truck. So Eagle's not only meant as the new age of transportation for astronauts, it's not only meant to enhance the science and exploration we're getting from the Artemis campaign. This is the vehicle that makes a sustainable presence in space possible. So the Eagle LTV is going to set up the first outpost on the moon, and the Eagle LTV, a variation of it, is eventually going to help set up cities on Mars.
How long is this thing going to last? Because of course that's a big issue with equipment
10
on
years.
the moon.
Yeah,
10
10
years.
years, which is hard.
Whenever I hear how harsh the environment on the moon is, I think to myself, this is hell. No one should ever
It's
go
brutal.
there. No one should ever try to build there. You're better off trying to build at the bottom of the Marianas Trench because you have dust that sticks to everything, that is ultra sharp, that will shred anything, that will destroy any gearbox, and it's ubiquitous, and you can't escape it or brush it off. And oh, by the way, the temperature range is like what, minus 200 C to plus 200 C day to night, something like that.
You're partnered with GM, right? Why don't you take a Hummer up there?
Yeah.
We're partnered with General Motors, Goodyear, Leidos, and MDA Space. General Motors and Goodyear actually helped with that original Apollo moon buggy. Not many people know that, but they have spaceflight heritage with that Apollo LRV. But as you were saying, Mims, this is a brutal environment. Like it's an absolutely brutal environment for humans or robotic systems. This contract wouldn't have been possible a decade ago, just in terms of the advancements we've made in robotics, artificial intelligence, and material science. So there are very high standards from NASA on this. They call it like a Class A mission. If astronauts are going to drive around this in this vehicle, it has to be absolutely bulletproof. So the validation and verification campaign, the testing that we're doing is extraordinarily extensive.
Okay, you've also mentioned using GM battery technology. So this thing's going to be like on the same Ultium platform that's in the electric Hummer?
We leverage a lot of the heritage from the Ultium platform. We do have different cells, and so I'll leave it to GM how they want to talk about the cell technology. But a lot of that learning and the research and development that has gone into that, a lot of the control electronics, all of that is being reutilized and then qualified for space. And going back the other way, the lessons learned that we're going in this like extreme testing campaign, as you said, negative 200 degrees Celsius to plus 200 degrees Celsius, that is being brought back to the General Motors vehicles we have here on Earth. So it's a pretty cool mutual benefit because it is such an extreme environment, because it necessitates technological advancement. Those learnings are being brought back to Earth.
For now, companies like Lunar Outpost rely on government agencies to fund what they're doing, which seems precarious. But what larger things are at stake in the new space race?
Nation-state competition is critical for space. It always has been, and for good reason. When we start looking at the moon, when we start looking at the asteroid belt, there are those near infinite amount of resources available in space, which if we can access that, that is a fundamental step change for humanity. Whoever controls those resources will control the future of where we go as a species.
More on that when we come back.
I listen to you say all that stuff, and it makes me think, gosh, this is going to be expensive, right? How much money? What's the sticker price on one of these Eagles? Or maybe another way of asking it is, how much money do you need to make this happen? I mean, not just become profitable, but to fund what your ambitions are.
If you're looking at the Lunar Terrain Vehicle Services Program, it's an IDIQ contract with NASA. All three vendors are publicly posted pricing. So you have one vendor in at 1.69 total, like this is the absolute maximum the contract can hit. We're at 1.72. Another vendor is at 1.9.
$1.72 billion.
$1.72 billion. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so it's just a spread in terms of who NASA is going to down select on. NASA is only going to pick one of these vendors to provide services long term. Now, just to be clear, that's not the price for one truck. So that's the price for us to provide services for a decade on the lunar surface. It could be multiple vehicles, and it could be many different mission profiles. Realistically, the pricing is going to be lower than that. But just because we are in a competitive phase, I'm not going to say exactly how much lower than that quite yet.
Well, I mean, I ask because, obviously a lot of nostalgia is seeped into the DNA of this new space race, right? The Artemis program, the sister of Apollo in mythology, Artemis hasn't gotten the greatest start, right? It's super behind schedule, right? And now there's concerns about NASA's budget being dramatically cut by the Trump administration. Where does that put things in this race to the moon?
What's pretty cool about where we're at, and just to look at, I would say, the opportunity, we as a space industry, for the first time, have reached a critical mass that we're moving forward, regardless of where the government funding is. Now, that being said, the cislunar market and the cislunar economy absolutely needs government funding to help us get to that tipping point. But the broader space industry is making rapid progress. That being said, we are huge proponents of what NASA is doing, not only in the human spaceflight and exploration portion of this, but also the science and exploration piece. So we are looking forward to seeing how the budgets shake out. Obviously, that influences our strategy. But I will say there's a lot of great people in the NASA community, and there's a lot of strong support amongst the public for NASA. We are sending our lunar terrain vehicle Eagle to the moon regardless in 2029. So we are going to be on the moon. If astronauts are there at the same time right away in 2029, perfect. We'll start providing those services to NASA. If astronauts are there a year later or 2 years later, that's okay as well. We'll start providing the robotic services to build out the infrastructure to get the surface of the moon ready for astronauts when they arrive. So that those habitats and the launch and landing pads and the power and comms I was talking about earlier.
I mean, it seems like the friction of the Cold War really helped funding and interest in going to the moon the first time. We are kind of at a point where maybe it's not quite a Cold War yet, but we're definitely some cold tensions between some major companies, major world powers out there. And I'm curious, what do you see in the current geopolitical situation that gives perhaps hope of renewed interest or a potential to kind of return to that space race? I think China, I think Russia. What's your read on this?
Nation-state competition is critical for space. It always has been, and for good reason. When we start looking at the moon, when we start looking at the asteroid belt, there are those near infinite amount of resources available in space, which if we can access that, that is a fundamental step change for humanity. Whoever controls those resources will control the future of where we go as a species. Now, it is going to take some time to get there. So, hearkening back to the national security and defense side of things, the moon is a giant satellite in Earth orbit. Whoever controls that has the biggest satellite in Earth orbit. So, think of it as a spacecraft. Nation state competition is certainly the downside of, or it can be seen as a downside in terms of how we utilize space, but it is critically important to drive funding into the space and aerospace economy. If you look at it from the opposite way, the flip side of the coin, space is also the ultimate soft power play. If you look at the Artemis Accords, the nation state cooperation that's happening. I think we're above 50 countries that are working with the United States of America.
This is the international kind of essentially like treaties among countries such as the U.S. and other allies out there.
Yeah, exactly. It's 50 countries allied together for common purpose to go to space and make it sustainable. Like just doing that together bolsters our cooperation internationally to the point where now it starts trickling into other parts of society and other parts of the ecosystem. So you start getting that technological cooperation, you start getting that political cooperation, you start getting that economic cooperation in space. It has multiplied benefits across each of these countries that are a part of the Artemis Accord. So as I said, over 50 countries allied with the United States to do this, which is massive. Of course, you do have Russia and China on the other side, and realistically, it is serious competition. China has made a massive amount of progress in a very short period of time. They're going to continue their campaign, and they're pressing hard to get astronauts on the moon by 2030. So we are competing with China, we are competing with Russia, and there's a lot at stake, whether it's resources or whether it's national security.
A big player in getting your moon truck to the moon is SpaceX's giant spaceship, Starship.
Yeah.
That's currently under development. We've seen several versions of the ship explode in recent months, and it's still very much a work in progress. Can you continue to rely on Musk's company to get the Eagle to the moon, or is there a backup? Are you basically on hold as they figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, as any good company does, we have alternate paths. So we're getting to the moon no matter what in 2029. I love Starship, the vision behind it. I think it's a really exciting launch platform that's an order of magnitude more in capabilities than we currently have. What I love about the space industry, though, is like we're no longer just one path, right? There's many paths, and sometimes they're competing, sometimes they're working together, but it's providing all of these variations to a point where there isn't that hey, one thing fails and then we're all kind of screwed if one thing fails. SpaceX is dominant. There's no doubt about it, right? Like with their Falcon platform, they are dominant. But you do also have Blue Origin, and Blue Origin, they're working in the background. You know, I think they're getting things in place to be a serious competitor long term. And then, as I said, you do have Rocket Lab, and you do have these other medium launch and landing type capabilities that are out there that are viable alternatives. Not quite to the scale of Starship or what Blue Origin's doing with Blue Moon or their HLS platform, but there are other options.
I find Blue Origin fascinating because it feels like a classic Jeff Bezos play where, you know, it's the turtle and the hare, but, you know, never bet against, in this case, you know, the turtle, the slow build, being really careful about, you know, each stage of getting to what comes next. You were at Remars. I'm just curious, you know, that's an Amazon Jeff event. Have the two of you met? Have you gotten a chance to talk about this? What does he think about your vision?
I have met Jeff. I have no idea if he remembers me or not. I'm sure he meets many people.
How could he not?
He was a very, very cool guy, and you know, obviously, like talks like an expert about it. Talks as an expert about what I was just talking to him about, in a general sense. So you can never underestimate Jeff. You can never underestimate Elon. I think the space industry is very lucky to have two people that are extraordinarily competitive, that want to succeed that are competing against each other. I think there's nation state competition, but we also have two of the greatest entrepreneurs of our time that are now competing against each other in space. So what Jeff is doing with Blue, what Elon's doing with SpaceX, it is going to be an exciting next decade in space to watch these two compete. And I think at the end of the day, us as humanity, we're going to win.
And it's interesting because they have two very different visions, right? Musk
Yeah.
very much wants to go to Mars. He thinks the moon has been done, essentially. I mean, he's talked about the moon, but Mars is his priority. Bezos is about the moon. Do you think we'll actually see manned missions to Mars in our lifetime?
I do. When we start looking at the pace, and this is just a kind of base analysis from my side, when we start looking at the pace of how quickly not only we're moving at Lunar Outpost, but that other companies are moving, SpaceX, Blue Origin, Stoke Space, many others, how quickly other nations are now moving, China and Russia in particular, we are seeing a completely different ecosystem than we saw for the last 50 years. Like we had Apollo, then we had, the Mars Perseverance rover and, a few of the other Mars rovers, and we had the International Space Station, and those were all great accomplishments, but the pace actually slowed down pretty drastically in the space industry. Like the pace at which we're evolving was slower. We have increased that pace to now an exponential curve over the course of the last decade. So if we can continue that pace, if we can continue to attract investment as we have and produce results, like so at Lunar Outpost, I think our average revenue growth over the last 7 to 8 years is like 2.4x each and every year. And so if we can keep showing that value to our customers, to NASA, to the Department of Defense, to the Australian Space Agency, ESA, if we can keep growing the commercial side of the lunar economy and adding value back here to Earth, I do think there is going to be the funding. I think there's going to be the vision. And I think there's going to be the technology that allows us to get to Mars within our lifetimes.
Okay, I just got to ask you one really quick follow-up, though.
Yeah.
You're bringing trucks to the moon. Do we really need car culture on the moon? Why couldn't we have a walkable moon? Or like moon bicycles?
Moon bikes.
Oh, man.
Moon scooters.
What happened to moon urbanism, Justin?
Yeah, geez. Taking big car to the moon.
It is a massive truck. It is 100% a massive
Are we going to have cars and coffee in the South Pole of the moon?
You know what? I've been trying to convince NASA to let me have a radio that you can control with your hands that pipes in music directly to the astronaut's helmet, but I haven't convinced them yet. So I want to have a radio. I'd love it if I could hook up to their life support system. They can get some coffee, but I don't think NASA's going to let me do that anytime soon. Like, you guys got to come out and drive a space truck. If you're ever out in Colorado, please let me know, because it is fun. Like it's a mix between a dune buggy and a heavy duty truck. So it is actually an absolute blast to drive. It's enjoyable, really smooth suspension. But it's also just kind of a new and novel way to traverse on the moon. So very much a truck, but it has like 0-point turns. You can go over these massive like rocks and obstacles. You can go in and out of like these pretty steep craters. So very much a truck, but mixed with a dune buggy.
That's appealing, but I don't think Tim even has a driver's license.
Well, not for the moon. Oh no, I have a driver's license, and I think we got to leave it at that. Justin, thank you. I can't wait to drive this vehicle on the moon and talk to you some more.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim, Mims, thanks for having me.
We reached out to the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. A spokesperson said the Chinese government has always adhered to the idea of using and exploring outer space for peaceful purposes.
We reached out to the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C. They did not respond to a request for comment.
We reached out to Blue Origin, which declined to comment. We also reached out to SpaceX, which did not respond to a request for comment.
Stick around. Tim and I unpack what we just heard from Justin Cyrus and talk about whether we're really in a new space race.
So Justin Cyrus compares the space industry to something like the internet in the 1990s. What do you think he's getting at there?
Well, for one, you've got the government funding propping up the whole thing. because of course that was key to building out the original backbones of the internet.
Right, the Al Gore money.
That's right.
Right,
the Al Gore money. Get all that fiber in the ground. But of course, what we're doing instead is building this physical infrastructure on the moon and in, as they like to say, cislunar space. So not a week goes by that I don't get a pitch about somebody trying to basically set up literally the internet, but in space, 4G on the moon. But of course, what Justin Cyrus and the other folks who are competing for this NASA gig for a truck want to build is a physical infrastructure.
Well, one thing I want to disagree with is I don't think we're quite to the 1990s yet, because we're not yet on the moon, right? But what gives all of these folks so much hope is that they can get there in a more affordable way, right? They look at what SpaceX is doing, and they're betting huge on the idea that Elon Musk's giant spaceship, Starship, is going to work and is going to make taking giant pieces of machinery, parts of life that are going to be needed to the moon in a rather affordable way. So I think that is one of the big differences on this kind of bigger dream of the lunar economy that, people have dreamed of going and living on the moon and outer space for a long time, but it's been super, super expensive. And the kind of the vision that Musk and Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin are kind of putting forward is making accessing outer space more common, more affordable.
Yeah, what do you make of this idea that sooner rather than later, there will be a lunar economy that is self-sustaining or at least at break even? Because this is all government contracts right now. So Justin's company and the others are all competing for this NASA contract for a moon truck, right? The moon truck doesn't happen without taxpayer money. What do you make of this claim that this is going to actually be commercialized?
Yeah, it almost feels like a chicken or egg sort of situation. Is there an economy on the moon? Well, not currently, right? You hear the dream, right? That essentially there's going to be all this mining potential in helium-3, which I know is a big topic of fascination for you.
Yeah, and don't forget those critical minerals. It's right there in the name. They're critical.
Right, critical.
I thought it was funny when I said to Justin, aren't we going to go to the bottom of the ocean, dig these up first? Because, of course, deep sea mining is getting big, and it's a lot easier to go to the bottom of the ocean, it turns out, than to go to the moon. And he said, well, we wouldn't want the environmental destruction. But now I'm picturing, we all look up at the moon, its iconic face, the man in the moon. I mean, are we going to have giant open pit mines on the moon? What's it going to take?
There's going to be, I guess there won't be a brown cloud of pollution up there, but we're ready to start tearing it up, right? I mean, this is like the plot line of Expanse, right? Or some of these science fiction movies where kind of industry takes us into the outer reaches for all these kind of messy materials, and we send people off to get it.
In my own research for this interview, the experts that I found the most credible said, we actually don't know what the killer app for the space economy or the lunar economy is yet. And hopefully we will discover it. So I guess somewhere out in space, there's a mystery substance or some chain of events that helps us leverage travel within our solar system in a way that we find economically advantageous. But I really don't think that we are there yet. That said, I do admire the folks who are trying to get us there, because as much as they are private companies, they're really taking on the role of creating an infrastructure that allows for the same kind of scientific work and scientific exploration that NASA has done forever. But now, of course, it's being privatized. I guess that's my last question for you, Tim. What do you make of the way that NASA has moved toward private contractors for what used to be core functions of what the agency did?
Well, that's kind of the vision that Musk kind of has laid out, right? That NASA was too bloated, too expensive, that he wanted to show and get excitement for going to space with SpaceX. So that was kind of the idea, get people excited about going. So in a lot of ways, SpaceX has been hugely successful, right? There are a whole bunch of copycats wanting to do the same thing.
Justin mentioned that the moon is, in terms of nearby space anyway, it's the ultimate high ground, which of course is an old term when you think about taking the high ground with your archers or your artillery. Do you think that the moon is going to get militarized? Is that inevitable?
Well, we've already seen space in some ways become that way, right? a natural place for a Cold War. In some ways, it's probably good for those who are pro-space in the U.S. because it creates a tension point and a need for the U.S. to compete against somebody else. That's what helped the Apollo missions back in the day, trying to beat the Russians. So in some ways, having an adversary like that is good. I don't think some would see it as a good thing to be wanting to find a new place to fight. Let's take peace to the moon.
It's really too bad. I want to paint an alternate picture here. It is possible to imagine a future in which space is once again a place where combatants on either side of a Cold War can collaborate, right? We saw that at the end of the last Cold War with the US and Russia collaborating on the International Space Station, with Russia being the sole way to bring American astronauts to space for a long time. So imagine a world in which Sam Altman's Helion or one of these other fusion companies actually makes it work. They need a ready supply of helium-3. The best place to get it turns out to be the moon. The US and China collaborate on an international mission to establish a moon base so they can send regular packages of helium-3 back to the Earth. And we get that unlimited fusion energy we were promised. We use it to solve for and adapt to climate change. There could be a bright future here. It doesn't have to just be, moon tanks shooting at each other while we fight over the high ground and the dwindling supply of critical minerals that are available on the moon.
Or, how about this? We just send all the politicians to the moon.
So they can rule us from afar in luxury. And that's Bold Names. We're wrapping up this season, but we'll be back with new episodes on Fridays starting September 12th.
We'll also be posting videos of our episodes on YouTube starting then, so make sure you subscribe to WSJ Podcasts and follow Bold Names.
Our producer is Ariana Asparu.
We had additional help this week from Danny Lewis and Kasha Brusalian.
Our fact checker is Aparna Nazan. Michael Laval and Jessica Fenton are our sound designers. Jessica also wrote our theme music.
Our supervising producer is Catherine Millsop. Our development producer is Aisha Al-Muslim. Scott Salloway and Chris Sinsley are the deputy editors, and Falana Patterson is the Wall Street Journal's head of news audio.
For even more, check out our columns on WSJ.com. We've linked them in the show notes.
I'm Tim Higgins.
And I'm Christopher Mims. Thanks for listening.